full-length of poetry, Beirut again, was published 10 by the Off the Grid Press. His chapbook, Time of Ripe Figs, was the winner of the White Eagle Press 2000 chapbook competition. His poems have been recently appeared in Ibsen, Pather, the Comstock Review, Concrete Wolf, Rhino, and Salamander. He graduated from Princeton and received chemistry from Cornell University, and he currently resides in Lexington. You took up writing poetry in your fifth impetus for that.
The impetus was simply listening to other people. I was a member of a Unitarian group in Appleton, and we produced our own programs and wanted 3 or 4 local women who were poets read their poetry for us. And out after that, on my way home, thinking to myself, I bet I can do that. A line from my first poem written before I got home, or in my head before I got home. And so I joined a workshop that some of these women were in, and was in it for a good many decades until we moved east. And then I was in a number of different workshops here, and joined Barbara Helfgott Hyatt's workshop for publishing poets in 1997. Been in it now for about 20 years.
How is that? I mean, what's that workshop like?
I find it terrific. It depends. People came to it and went away because they didn't like it.
Why wouldn't they like it?
Well, I don't know, but I think the thing about Barbers Workshop is it was totally unlike any other workshop I'd been in. It seems that the procedure was to make the poem you'd written as good a poem as it could be, okay? Workshop is not like that. Barbers Workshop was to find out what the best poem was within what you'd written, and it might was. And maybe there'd only be half a dozen lines left. Some people didn't want that kind of treatment of their poetry. Good poets in the Boston area who were like that. They didn't want that kind of treatment for their work. I feel my poems weren't getting any better in the previous decade and a half. And thought this is perfect because my poems are getting better. They're really getting better. They're getting more concise. They're getting more to the point. They're losing their sentimentality. They're losing discursiveness, and they're about something instead of just being a description of the beautiful sunset, for example. So the other thing that happened in the first years after I joined the workshop was my wife died, and that altered my poetry in a real way. It made it a lot better. And there was an essay in the New York Times book review by a man who said his poetry got a lot better after his daughter died. And he gave some reasons. It seemed to me you're confronting mortality, which makes you concentrate on what you're doing because it's important, whether it's your wife or maybe your own mortality you're worried about. And so my poems got much better for that. And that's what led to the chapbook in 2000.
Keeping Night at Bay.
Well, this is, and it was in that. It still has a poem about my wife in it, you know.
Mm-hmm. Keeping Night at Bay is your latest chapbook, right?
One was The Time of Ripe Figs.
No, but I'm saying your latest.
This is Keeping Night at Bay.
That's the latest one, and that's yeah. Mm-hmm. Now you were a chemistry professor many years,
yeah.
right? And I'm wondering if the discipline of a scientist was a help or a hindrance in poetry.
I don't think it was a help. I'm not sure if it was a hindrance. That if you had 2 people, one of whom was full of great ideas and the other loved words, would be a poet was the one who loved words. Now, I've done crossword puzzles for years, and my brother and I used to, he'd write one and I'd write, we'd send them to each other. So I guess maybe it was a love of words that made it work for me. I don't think the disciplines had a real effect on it. I don't think so, but I don't really know. Yeah, it's possible, but I don't think so. Yeah.
Now you you translated classical Chinese poetry. Dynasty is
most of it from the Tang, some from a later dynasty, some from the Song, mostly from the Tang, because the Chinese gentleman that I worked with who was a fellow of the Fairbank Institute at Harvard, wanted that poetry translated. Three poets were really Wang Wei, Liba, and Du Fu.
Didn't Confucius do a big sort of anthology of
No, I didn't. No.
No, Confucius.
Confucius.
I thought.
I don't know because we didn't work with anything that old.
Oh, okay,
right?
okay.
What we were working with was in the study the 8th century.
Yeah.
Which was, I think, when he thought the best. And so I got to it for the same reason I got to writing my own poetry. I went out from a reading that someone had given at Lawrence, thinking, gee, I bet I can do that. And the teacher, a Chinese teacher there, got me started in it, and then she knew I was moving to Cambridge, and she said, well, why don't you go to Harvard Yenching Library? So I went to Harvard Yenching Library, and I think Miss Ho was a librarian then. And anyway, I told her what I wanted. The person beside her and said, Gundi Chan. And it turned out that Gundi Chan was the guy I worked with. Incidentally, Gundi comes from Gandhi. That's why his parents knew me. And he wanted desperately to have these poems translated, and he'd grown up with, I felt that he really understood them in ways that I couldn't understand them. But find translations, or some of them are simple, but I would always use the Chinese dictionary because I didn't want to rely on someone else's words in a translation. I wanted Chinese meant, and then see what I could do with it. And then I'd bring them in, and we'd go over that I got it wrong. And I sometimes was worried because in Chinese, you know, there's didn't be any one of several parts of speech. And I always wondered whether I had the wrong part of speech for something, but I couldn't because his English was not that good. So in 4 years, I translated 400 poems. They're sitting in my computer, and a few of them have been published, and 4 of them are book.
And you're going to have a bigger book out, right?
My bigger book has 7, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now you're from Lebanon originally, right?
Yeah.
And so any Lebanese poet like Gibran?
Khalil Gibran.
Yeah, Gibran.
I didn't know his work at all.
Oh, okay.
Until I was more than an adult.
Oh.
Yeah, I was born there, grew up there. My father was born there and grew up there. For the war, we had to leave in 1941 because of World War II. It was a great.
How so?
It was a wonderful climate. It was a very safe city. There were all kinds of people in it. There was a relatively small American, big enough so you could have a variety of friends, but small enough so families knew all the other families. So it was a very.
You're not Lebanese yourself.
I'm not Lebanese, no.
Your father.
My father was American.
And what was he doing there?
He was a professor of chemistry at Beirut.
Okay.
His father went out there in 1883 to teach English, starting to be the director of the observatory because the guy who was going to teach English didn't leave. The history of the family in that country goes back a long, long way. Where my father grew up, and it was a wonderful country to hike in. A summer house in the mountains. In school, everybody knew each other. There were no cliques, as far as I was aware. There was no picking on people.
Different.
Very different. Very different from, and it had 5 or 6 people in it.
Wow. Well, you were lucky.
I was very lucky.
Now, it seems to me you discussed mortality. You're 87 years old, so
Yeah.
it's closer than me at 62. So,
Yeah.
In some ways, I would think that keeping the night at bay would sort of the title. Is a reflection of that, trying to keep.
A reflection of that. Part of it is about, as with my other 2 books, is about my wife's illness, and she died. There's a poem, there are a couple of poems that have my mortality in them, because I had a 1.5 years ago.
Seem to be doing well. You seem to be doing.
I'm very happy that I'm over it as well as I am.
Yeah.
And there's an elegy for my son, an elegy for my brother, who also
You lost
died.
your son?
Hmm?
You lost your son?
Yeah, in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
How
old was your son?
He was 50.
Wow.
53.
Wow, young.
So, yeah, this book, Keeping Night at Bay, is in a way about mortality. There's a lot in the poetry about it. Not all of it, but a lot of it.
Now, I was reading a poem that I can certainly relate to because my father was of quote unquote the greatest generation, and affection wasn't shown, demonstratively. It was in the texture of one's life. And your father, who he didn't, I mean, at least in this poem, I shouldn't assume that it was your father, but in the poem, he's crafting a knife.
He's building making a knife for me.
Through that, you could see the love, how he, your hands touched, and he sort of guided you. And
he in ancient times, the way the father could show love to his son was to train him in the business, right? The butcher or the carpenter or the shoemaker. And my father's way of showing his love was to show me how to make things and to take me on hikes, And I didn't need to have him say anything. I mean, the relationship was, you could tell. I could tell. I never felt I was neglected by him, for example.
Good. Now, why don't you start off, you have some time to read, about 12 minutes, so why don't you start off with that? And by the way, you're going to be reading soon, right?
No, I don't have any more readings.
But you just read at Porter Square.
Yeah, I'm going to have a at Lawrence. I mean, it's at Brookhaven, early in November.
Okay.
My father never spoke of love. One evening he said, "I'm going to make like mine, and you can come and watch me if you'd like." I woke early, hearing the emery wheel grinding in his workshop. When he saw me, he nodded, while he kept turning the handle of the wheel. Sparks flew like a rain of comets. When Mother called us to lunch, he left his gloves, ate in silence. All afternoon I watched him shape that file into a perfect blade. Next day he carved a handle until it fit my hand, riveted it to the blade, for which he made a wooden sheath, then into a leather cover with a loop to hang it from my belt. After dinner he showed me how to sharpen it. Hold the knife like this, angled to the whetstone, forth, one side then the other. His heavy hand pushed mine the way it had to go.
You were talking about your style of poetry, and I don't know if you know Robert K. Johnson. He used to run the Newton Free Library Poetry, and he's also of that philosophy of getting it down to the bare bones, so the extra fat. And other people like to write more effusive. What's your take on that?
Well, I like to take it down to the bare bones. It's not clear whether this one is to the bare bones. I think it may be. Think of anything that's in it that doesn't belong in it. But I do like to cut things down to the bare bones. Sometimes you cut too far, and I don't argue with people who want to be more discursive about it. I mean, there's great poems done that way too.
Okay.
I mean, I would never say somebody's poetry is lousy because he can't write it the way I write. Terrible thing to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good. Continue, sir.
Okay. Well, let me read one that's cut down to the minimum. In rehab, I can't sing the songs I sang when I was new to love. Lyrics choke my throat, bringing back my dreams, the way you changed my life. My humming keeps night at bay. O Orpheus, when sorrow choked your throat, blue, you let That was
Nice.
a lot longer when it began, I think.
Really? Yeah.
And
Why don't you read one of your Chinese translations?
let's see. I like the first one. It's called Remember. It's by a woman, Li Qingzhao, who lived from 1084 to...
Now, no, you say you can't speak Chinese.
I can't speak Chinese.
But you can read it, obviously.
No, I can't read it either, no.
And how do you
I use a dictionary.
Okay.
In a dictionary, because it's organized by the number of strokes. And it's sometimes, if you're a beginner, it's very hard to see how many strokes is in one of these.
But isn't the nuances lost and things like that from doing it?
I'm sure there are. I mean, you know, it's my poetry.
Yeah.
And
so you put your own take on it.
It's my poetry. I think it was Auden who said, or someone said, poetry is what is lost in translation. So this one is called Remember.
Good quote.
Remember the water pavilion at sunset, wine and pleasure. Returning late, exhausted, we lost our way, pulled the boat deeper, deeper into the lotus, struggled to get through, and egrets up from a sandbar. And
Chinese poetry has that quality that you have in your own poetry, doesn't it? And a lot of it is stripped down, and it's you know.
I think it is, and I mean, if you look at that poem, if you look at a classical poem like this one, well, let's read the other, called Brothers by Dufu. I decided early on that I wanted to make it, that is, the Chinese is 2 squares, right? Mm. There are 4 lines, and each line has 5 characters. And I wanted to make my poem have a squareness to it, or rectangularity. The poem is 2 stanzas of 4 lines, and the lines are not exactly the same, but I don't try to do the rhyming that they have, or the tone or anything. This is, war drums interrupt all journeys. Geese cry winter to the frontier. Dew will be white after tonight. At home, the moon is always full. My brothers are scattered. No one knows if they are alive or dead. Our letters never reach each other. Worse to come. Most of these poems are actually constructed as balancing couplets, but I put it into, and that was my way of doing it. Mm-hmm. It was good discipline, I think, because it said that of architects that the best architecture comes from someone when they're limited by time, money, materials, clients, everything. They're limited. When they're limited, they have to use their ingenuity to make it come out. And it didn't occur to me until just a few weeks ago that these poems are limited and that they have to be sort of 4 square, like the original Chinese. And that means it's not to make them come out about like that. And whether it means better poems or worse poems, I don't know.
You said that you're probably not going to write much poetry anymore. In fact, the next book you have out may be your last. But I mean, you know, did poetry change your life? If you had to say.
Well, it got me through bad times.
You know, I've had a lot of poets. There's a Philip Burnham, I don't know if you know him. His wife died. He came to a poetry workshop I was running, and he's saying it was a way he coped,
I could say things in a poem that I couldn't say to anybody. It was a way to get it out without, you talk to most people about it. And I didn't have heard of it. It's filled and a certain amount of confidence, pleasure to use words and make it come out. And I'd have to say professional. And
well, how would you define
someone who makes a living?
Well, not many people make a living in poetry.
Very few. Well, a lot of them teaches workshops.
Right.
She publishes a lot of poets, but she doesn't.
No.
So I mean, but I'm strictly professional because I can't take my office.
Oh, okay. That's what qualifies you here.
That's what.
Great. Well, come read a few more.
Okay, let's see. I'll read another translation. This is also by Du Fu. It's called Traveler. This traveler thinks of going home, used up sage amid heaven, a little cloud far up in the sky, a moon alone with eternal night. Sun sets, but my heart is still strong. Autumn winds blow me to health. In ancient time, horses for journeys that were not long. That's clearly in couplets originally, you can see it. And I'll read one longer one. This is the elegy from my brother who died in 2015. On summer nights, Orion used to stalk the west of our porch where we sat and listened to our father. The Bedouin named the stars, he said, and showed the points of the giant. Betelgeuse from Bit al-Jawza, the Regal from Rajul, the left foot, he said. Younger than I, you had to go to bed. I stayed and watched. During the day when we lit lemonade, sweating the armrests that held the glasses, Beirut was far below, washed by red sands among the green pines. Orion hunting Venus. Saturn, cold ghosts watching. Today, in your bed, your feet crackle against clean sheets, your face like Tutankhamun's, skin taut against your reedy gasps between long rests. We listen to Dvorak. The days are long. The bread uncut. I am resigned.
You probably have time for another one.
Hmm?
You probably have time for another one.
Let's have the other one that has Orion in it.
Okay.
In dread. So the sun is sinking. I will ignore the curtain between dusk and dawn, cook lentils, finish the crossword puzzle, work 2 words into this poem, watch the moon slip in the window. Waking from sleep, a turbulent dream, walk out onto the porch, greet Orion the hunter, leaning slantwise. All my life he has hung straight in the sky, a sign for childhood. Let it go. And the 2 words I picked from the crossword puzzle are slant and straight.
Crossword puzzle must have been a way for you to play with words and